This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg, here in South Africa. My name, of course, Eben Janssen. The show is very much live, broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. We are also streaming live on YouTube with the entire show available on demand on our YouTube channel. Now today we look at the growing crisis in Nigeria after the government's significant downplay the number of deaths in the Boko Haram siege of the last week. Another group of South Africans will also be traveling to Nigeria as guests of TB Joshua. We asked them your questions today on social media. The main question's been, when is TB Joshua then coming to South Africa after the promises that were made last year? We focus on racism in our minds a little bit later in Kimberley, where Ulrich Hendricks will be doing us an interview there. But first, let's get today's news with Katrine Miller.
Well, hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Katrine Malan, and let's just take a look at the top stories this morning. Nigeria says the number of people who lost their lives in an assault by Boko Haram militants on the town of Baga last week was no more than 150. The Nigerian government dismissed widespread reports that 2,000 people had died. The Defense Ministry said this figure included many of the terrorists who had attacked the town in Borno State and faced a resistance by troops. Nigerian journalist Solomon Ezang Ashom says the Nigerian government is not doing enough to end violence unleashed by Boko Haram in his country.
None of them is really coming out with really concrete proposal to say this is how we're going to tackle Boko Haram and all the killings of civilians.
Turkish authorities have confirmed that the female partner of one of the two Paris gunmen passed through Turkey on her way to Syria. They say there was no request from the French government to bar the entry of Hayat Boumediene. The two gunmen killed 17 people in 3 days of terror in and around Paris. Back in South Africa, Eskom says it is managing to keep the lights on despite a spike in demand, with businesses coming back on the line after the festive season. Losing money fast and facing a massive funding gap, Eskom is pleading with customers to cut down on electricity. The power utility has embarked on an aggressive drive to clamp down on cable theft, which costs more than 4 billion rand a year.
Eskom has sufficient funds to sustain its daily operations. When we're talking about running out of money, it refers specifically to the funds required to run our open cycle gas turbines, which burn diesel, to run them at the high rate at which we're doing at the moment of between 1 and 2 billion rand per month.
Many parents are crying foul as the second phase of the investigation into group cheating during the matric exams gets underway. They say it's delaying prospective students from tertiary education. Some school governing bodies are questioning the allegations. Matriculants found to have cheated could be banned from writing matric for the next 3 years. And Real Madrid's Portuguese marksman Cristiano Ronaldo has been named the world's best player for the year for a third time, racking up more than twice the votes of Lionel Messi. The hat trick tied him with Zinedine Zidane and Ronaldo of Brazil on 3 FIFA awards. Only Messi's 4 FIFA awards is ahead of the 29-year-old Ronaldo. Ronaldo retained also the highest individual honour after scoring 61 goals last year. Remember, all those top stories and more are all available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can then also keep up to date with our journalists who are all out and about all over the country on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Thank you, Katrine. Now, Boko Haram has carried out one of the bloodiest attacks in the northern Nigerian villages, leaving bodies scattered everywhere. Government dismissed allegations today that 2,000 people were killed in the attacks. Civilians were slaughtered in an assault around the Baga town in Borno State, near Nigeria's border with Chad. Nigeria will hold elections mid-February, even though Boko Haram is controlling large swathes of territory in the northeast of Africa's most populous country. Local authorities said Islamist militants sprayed bullets as they stormed into the area in a variety of trucks and armoured vehicles. Other militants on motorcycles pursued residents as they fled into the bush, firing indiscriminately. Dead bodies littered the bushes in the area, and survivors say they do not feel safe to even pick up the dead to go and bury them. Residents who hid inside their homes were burned alive. The raid is said to have lasted for 6 days. Boko Haram's leader has also threatened to attack neighboring Cameroon, and President Paul Biya has urged the international community to help battle the terror group. Now, to look at the latest attack, we have political analyst Lisa Otto, who will join us shortly live on the line from London, and Stephen Johnson from Good Governance Africa here with me in studio. Before I go to Lisa in London, Stephen, I just want you to set the scene on the latest developing news around the story, and that is the downgrading of the dead from more than 2,000 to 150. Can we trust these numbers of the Nigerian government after we saw the building collapse last year? The number was given as 3 in the days after the collapse, and we discovered that the number was actually more than 100 of people who perished in this incident. How do you view these numbers, and what is the message that this sends from the Nigerian government?
At the moment, we can't really trust the numbers coming from the Nigerian government, as in the days after the attack, there was very sketchy information coming from the government regarding what had actually happened. And Amnesty International has said at least up to 2,000 people have been killed. But until we get people from external organizations, the Red Cross, the UN there to go in and speak to the residents and find out what happened, we actually don't know. The reports we've gotten so far have pointed to that there have been a couple of 100 deaths. So this number of 150 may be related to the Nigerian elections coming up next month.
That was the question I was going to ask you next. How does it play out ahead of the elections, and why would they want to downgrade this number in an area where they have very little control and very little electioneering will be taking place? And from what we see, or the reports coming out, they have very little support there as well.
Well, Goodluck Jonathan's government is in quite a lot of trouble at the moment, as they're not very popular. They've seemed to be failing on a number of fronts, including corruption, getting the Chibok girls back from Boko Haram, and now this. So I think what we're seeing here is a case of the Nigerian government is trying to cover it up, trying to make it look not as bad as it really is until they can get the elections out of the way. But if they let external monitors in to see the situation, we'll be able to get a much clearer picture.
I'd like to come back to you just now, Stephen, and talk a little bit about the election. I also want to talk about the role of the international community and so forth. But, Johan, if we can go to the United Kingdom, where Lisa Otto is an expert on Nigeria. She also works for the University of Johannesburg here in South Africa, and is at university, I think, at the moment in London. She'll only be back in South Africa in February. But Lisa, good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. It's a pleasure.
Lisa, before I start to ask you about your views on what's happened in Nigeria, you're in the UK at the moment. Just tell us how this siege and how the deaths of so many Nigerian people have been reported in the United Kingdom.
There has been some reportage on the main kind of newspapers, but this has certainly been eclipsed by the Paris attacks. We haven't seen nearly as much reportage. And unfortunately, I suppose it's an issue that's not considered as newsworthy.
Is it a question that in mainstream Europe, what happens in the northeast of Nigeria is not as important as is what happens in Paris, or is it a case of white lives being more important than black lives in mainstream media?
Well, I think perhaps people struggle to relate to something that's happening in far-flung parts of the world, in a rural area that they can't really imagine, whereas perhaps what's happening in a big city like Paris, perhaps people have more they can kind of imagine, what if that happened in my city? But unfortunately, the lack of newsworthiness around the loss of massive lives in Africa, it does kind of come off reading that way, that reduced newsworthiness does kind of mean less value, or these lives less valuable.
Lisa, let's talk about the politics and the politicking going on in Nigeria at the moment. We see that the country is in the middle of a presidential campaign. How do you read the campaign itself? the campaigning that's been going on, and also then the reaction from Boko Haram to go into villages and really cut people down, like lives didn't matter at all. How do you view what's going on there at the moment?
Well, I think for Boko Haram, this has been a perfect opportunity at the time of the elections to show that the Nigerian government has failed effectively over the last 18 months to 2 years to really quell this terror group. And it really kind of brings out and shows, you know what, we are actually controlling huge swathes of the northern part of the country, and you're supposed to be having an election. And I think from the perspective of the election campaigning itself, where you're seeing this coming up in the media, it's coming from opposition parties. Opposition parties are trying to use it against Jonathan to say, look, very little has been done. Jonathan is not taking this seriously. Put us in power, we'll do something. On the other hand, the PDP and Jonathan itself, at least looking at news reportage that's coming out of Nigeria, are kind of trying to avoid the issue, and it doesn't seem to really be coming up. And so where one would imagine that this would be a major kind of election issue, it's turning out really not to be, which is quite sad, because it shows that in Nigeria this is not as big a priority as it should be.
The story of the day today is the numbers have been downplayed now by the Nigerian government, the number of casualties. Yes. It was at the weekend more than 2,000. It was revered as the biggest or the worst attack on Nigerian citizenry. Now they've downgraded to the number around 150. How do you read this number, and does it sit outside of the ambit of the Nigerian government to downplay these kinds of numbers ahead of an election?
Well, I think the Nigerian government, in a matter of course, downplays the numbers. It's become a habit to underreport in order to make the situation not look quite as bad as it is. So certainly ahead of elections, that would definitely be an imperative. Although having said that, I think it is also important to note that these areas are very isolated, very rural, and so they're getting there in itself and trying to establish what's going on can be quite difficult, and I think that's also affected the reportage, the fact that the nearest journalists can be hundreds of kilometers away. So I think that, along with you're having things like cell phone networks are being cut down in order to prevent terrorists from communicating with each other. So I think all these things present challenges to getting an understanding of what is actually really happening on the ground and what the real death toll would be. But we certainly can't discount kind of downplaying that would be happening as a matter of course anyway.
Finally, the last question I want to ask you before I let you go, Lisa, just tell us about the election campaign and the step up towards the middle of next month, when this campaign is going to happen. Do you see Boko Haram stepping up their campaign against Goodluck Jonathan and his government? Do you see more violent attacks? And what kind of response would you want to see from the international community if that is the case?
From Boko Haram's perspective, an election, it's the perfect timing for them really to step up their campaign, to escalate their activities, because the world's eyes will be on Nigeria at the moment, particularly since these elections are one of the most hotly contested. It's one of the first times that the opposition actually has a chance of wresting power away from the ruling party. So in this context, people are also expecting that there might be electoral violence. And for this reason, Boko Haram would really be getting kind of airplay from the media. So it is, from their perspective, a good time to be ramping up events. Although having said this, we can see incidents over the last 2 years or so. If you track those, you can see that there has kind of been a gradual progression in those attacks in any event. And, of course, Boko Haram has been working at seizing more and more territory in the north, which is essentially serving its ultimate goal of establishing an Islamic State. So I do think that we are likely to continue seeing attacks in the lead up to the election.
Lisa, thank you very much for joining us. Coming to you on the line from London, that is Lisa Otto, who's a political analyst, but also an expert on Nigeria here at the University of Johannesburg. She's busy studying until the middle of February in London at the moment. But with me in studio still, I've got Stephen Johnson from Good Governance Africa. Stephen, tell us about the northeastern parts of Nigeria, especially the border with Chad. What does it look like? How rural is it? And how out of control is the Nigerian government and army in specific of this area?
Well, northeastern Nigeria, especially Borno State and around Baga, has its very own distinctive ethnic group that isn't just confined to northeastern Nigeria. It also spills over into Cameroon and Chad. So you do have this problem where you have people running away from what's happened in Baga, and they've crossed the border. In terms of... Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, just talk to us about that specific part of Nigeria, which you're telling is very rural. But tell us about the control that the Nigerian army has, or the little control that they have in this sort of area, and how that plays out into the day-to-day lives of people there.
Sure. What foreshadowed these attacks was there was the multinational joint task force headquarters based just outside of Baga, and that got overrun on January the 3rd. Yeah. So the Nigerian military's presence leading up to these massacres was almost nothing. Yeah. After this attack, they've effectively lost control of Borno State. And until they move in again and retake these towns from Boko Haram, they don't have much going for them there. And in terms of the people that live there, it is very rural, it's a very agrarian society, and this has helped with our problems with reporting. As Lisa said, there's not much in the way of cell phone connection, there's not much in the way of internet penetration. Yeah. So people can't, and due to the poverty of the area, people can't just film things on their phones and put it on the internet to let the world know. Yes. This problem with information coming out is probably one of the most serious things, is nobody actually knows what's going on the ground there. And as we've seen from the Nigerian government, they're not very keen to give a clear report on this.
Tell us about the Nigerian government, the army in specific, why it took 6 days after the siege started for the army to finally go in and start helping people. Is it a fear factor that the Nigerian army might be under-equipped to deal with this problem?
The Nigerian army faces two very serious challenges at the moment. The first one is they are under-equipped, and there's massive corruption in the army. There are reports coming out of soldiers having to bribe the armory to get working guns and sufficient bullets. Yes. And the second problem with their response has been, due to Nigeria's history of military coups, over the last 15 years, it's been sort of the government's policy to keep the army a little bit underfunded and not too strong, as they are worried about military coups. So this was fine when Nigeria didn't have an internal crisis, but at the moment you have an army where your officers are corrupt. Literally, there have been many reported cases of officers selling weapons to Boko Haram and supplying them with intelligence, and then you have recruits who live in terrible conditions. They don't have the weapons or equipment they need. They're badly fed and housed, which just creates this incredible situation of low morale. So you have your troops on the ground who don't want to go in, and then you have your officers who seem to be more interested in corruption than actually solving the problems.
What about politicking now ahead of this election? When we look at it, is it a scenario that these areas are the opposition or political opposition strongholds? The government's not going to win a lot of votes there anyhow by their own judgment, if the way that I'm reading it. So therefore they're leaving these people pretty much to their own devices.
I have also come across that one. To be honest, I can't answer definitively, but it would not seem to play into Goodluck Jonathan's party, the PDP's favour, to do this, because the entire situation has very much made Jonathan look like he's not in control of what's going on. So as much as it is an opposition stronghold, it does cost him votes all over the country. He is definitely losing popularity. So at this point, I don't think it's a case of this is a malicious thing. Yeah. I think the government and army don't really have the capacity to deal with the problem.
Let's talk, in conclusion, around this scenario. Let's talk about international intervention. Now, elsewhere in the world, if there were more natural resources in this area, the world would have intervened almost immediately. Is it as simple as that? Or is there other scenarios at play when we talk about sovereignty of states and the like, which is always the excuse that gets put forward in this space. What about the international community? What about the African Union?
In this case, especially with the African Union and ECOWAS, Nigeria is the major donor. They supply most of the troops for missions in this area, so you can see the immediate problem there. But with international intervention, it may not be a bad idea for Jonathan's government to consider it, as a lot of the problem is that people don't trust the security forces that are operating there. Some people see them just as bad as Boko Haram, because you have these poor soldiers stealing from the population. So what they need is security forces who are honest, who are able to protect the citizens there, and maybe these can only come from the outside. Maybe it should be South African or Kenyan or Ugandan troops there. But this must obviously be done with the consent of the government. And any move beyond that.
Well, we're starting to run, Stephen, with a story that the UN and the USA say that they are going to get involved in some way. We don't know why. Thank you very much for joining us today. Stephen Johnson from Good Governance Africa, giving us a real insight, thank you, as to what is happening in the northeast of Nigeria. We've got an election in that country, next month, middle of next month, presidential elections it is. And one can understand that a lot more political violence looks to be the order of the day as we build up to that. Just to recap the latest story now on this, the United Nations and the United States of America say they have now reached out to the Nigerian government and offered their help in ending the reign of terror by Boko Haram. The Nigerian-based group has killed thousands of people in its push to create an Islamist state in northeast Nigeria. Recently, hundreds of people have been massacred in the northeastern town of Baga, while a bomb detonated by a 10-year-old girl in Maiduguri has left 19 people dead. Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan is running for re-election on the February 14th, Valentine's Day, that is, but it is uncertain how voting can proceed in areas under the control of Boko Haram. Well, let's have a quick look at some of your views on this very story at SABC Newsroom. That's where you can interact with us. Chandalyn Rossi says, if the US gets involved, won't that cause more damage? Look at Syria, Iraq, Libya. Yes, I suppose it depends on what kind of natural resources is available. Depends on whether it gets better or worse. Vusi says, French president is determined protecting his people. Won't say the same about bad luck Jonathan. Oh, that one from Vusi. Hardcore Vusi. Bring back our girls is one of the hashtags that he puts up. Mona Lisa says 17 people killed in Paris and the world marches. In Nigeria, over 2,000 massacred, and we're yet to see the same outcry. Well, Mona Lisa, even the Nigerian government are now downplaying the massacre, saying only around 150 people died. As if that would be any better, I ask. But let's have a look at our tweet of the day. We love your contributions. This one comes from Tommy Calaverius on the media coverage of the Nigerian massacre. This is the tweet of the day for us. At Calaverius, T. Calaverius, he says, African lives matter. Boko Haram kills 2,000 people in Nigeria and the international media is quiet, is what Tommy Calaverius says to us today. That is our tweet of the day. Thank you to Tommy. Keep your tweets coming. We'll put them up if they're really good. Every day we're looking for one of you that sees the things that the mainstream media is not seeing. Let's now take a look at the front pages from around the world today. Of course, we'll start in Nigeria. Now, while our attention here in South Africa is very much on the recent attacks from Boko Haram there, the Vanguard paper is focused on the closed-door meeting that took place between President Goodluck Jonathan and former President Olusegun Obasanjo. In the United Kingdom, The Times has a photo of actor Eddie Redmayne there. The British actor was named Best Actor at the Golden Globes yesterday for his performance as Professor Stephen Hawking in The Theory of Everything. And in Spain, as you see on screen now, papers are showing a cheerful Cristiano Ronaldo. This after the footballer won FIFA's Ballon d'Or for the second straight year last month. Before we go to an ad break, let's just take a quick look at what's happening across the country here in South Africa. In Johannesburg, the Gauteng Education MEC, Panyaza Lesufi, will brief the media on the rollout of the new paperless education system at the Boitumeleng Secondary School today. In Pretoria, the Agriculture Minister, Senzeni Zokwana, is expected to brief the media on foot and mouth disease operation compliance for 2015 in Arcadia, in that neck of the woods. And in Durban, the South African Communist Party will brief the media on the outcomes of its 7th elective provincial congress that was held in Musgrave. All up there. This is Newsroom. We're back with you after a short break.
Because of cancer, I realized life is short. I want to live my dream.
They can burn my face, but not my voice.
I'm definitely not a cross-dresser. South Africa, I'm just a gay man.
Join Puleng Molebatsi on Bupilong every Saturday at 17:30 CAT.
Well, hello and welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's just take a recap at the top stories. Nigeria says the number of people who lost their lives in an assault by Boko Haram militants on the town of Baga last week was no more than 150. The Nigerian government dismissed widespread reports that 2,000 people had died. The Defense Ministry said this figure included many of the terrorists who had attacked the town in Borno State and faced resistance by troops. Eskom says it is managing to keep the lights on despite a spike in demand, with businesses coming back online after the festive season. Losing money fast and facing a massive funding gap, Eskom is pleading with consumers to cut down on electricity. The power utility has embarked on an aggressive drive to clamp down on cable theft, which costs more than 4 billion rand a year. And Real Madrid's Portuguese marksman Cristiano Ronaldo has been named the world's best player for the year for a third time, raking up more than twice votes of Lionel Messi. The hat-trick tied him with Zinedine Zidane and Ronaldo of Brazil on 3 FIFA awards. Only Messi's 4 FIFA awards is ahead of the 29-year-olds. Ronaldo retained football's highest individual honour after scoring 61 goals last year. Well, all those top stories and more are all available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can then also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, back to you.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Another group of South African families will be heading for Nigeria very soon as guests of TB Joshua's Synagogue Church of All Nations. It's the second group of families who lost their loved ones 4 months ago to visit Nigeria, with all expenses set to be paid by the popular televangelist. The first group of 52 people who spent Christmas in Nigeria have just returned. A total of 116 people, including 85 South Africans, were killed when a building belonging to the Synagogue Church of All Nations collapsed on September 12 in Lagos, Nigeria. Now, the Synagogue Church of All Nations, or SCOAN's representative in South Africa, Mr. Kirsten Nematandani, is with us once again here in a studio to talk about this and other issues surrounding this heartfelt story here in South Africa. Good morning to you, Mr. Nematandani. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning to you and to your viewers out there. Thanks for having me here.
Let's start with the trips. We've seen that a group have just returned from Nigeria. What's the significance of these trips that the families are making back to Nigeria now?
Thank you very much. I think it's a very important exercise that the church is engaged in particular with the instruction from Senior Pastor Prophet T.B. Joshua, that the families should come in so that as part of a healing and finding a closure, they need to be able to see even the site where the incident happened and to understand exactly what type of a structure is the one that is ultimately come down. And of course, to receive further counseling and for him to have a one-on-one with them, very, very important, because, you know, various family members takes this thing in different ways. And of course, it's part of a program that has started in the country, as you know, since the incident. Members were crisscrossing this country, seeing those members.
We've got some questions from our viewers that we just want to put up and ask you to respond to some of the questions from our viewers on social media. If you can just pop them up on the screen, Jan, I'll have a look at them and we can ask Mr. Nematandani to just respond to some of our viewers' questions. There we have Comrade Bright Longwane, the real Blighty. Where are our bodies is the question that he's asking. And then the second question is, where is T.B. Joshua? When is he coming to South Africa, Mr. Nematandani? But let's first start with the remaining bodies. There's a lot of angst in South Africa. Those families feel that, you know, there's been very little word on the bodies. We understand the difficulty of the process. If you can just maybe answer that first question.
Thank you very much. I must say government has been working around the clock in this respect. As you know, this is government to government. And you know, they've now gone to the second round of DNA testing, and the 11 bodies are still receiving further attention. And we trust that our government will not rest in pushing the Nigerian government to find a closure on this matter. Of course, the Prophet himself indicated that he's neither going to rest or sleep, because he'll continue to pray, because he says when you pray for a person, that's how you show love.
Let me just finish up with that question. Just tell us about the difficulty that the authorities are having with DNA sampling of these remaining bodies, and then what do you think the chances are of them even being identified?
Look, I'm quite optimistic that they will manage to identify them. I think you have science that has grown this much at this day and age that I do not believe they will fail. It could be some obstacles here and there, and they should be a mechanism to finally come to that. Of course, they do not communicate to us directly. They communicate to government. Yeah. But I'm very hopeful that indeed that is going to happen. The question as to when Senior Prophet
yes, when is that's a question that actually the most asked question on social media by all of our viewers is that T.B. Joshua promised to come to South Africa to speak to the people and to follow up with the families, show good faith and face. And the question is, where is he and why has he not come to South Africa yet?
Well, I must confirm to you that that process is still on. It's a principle of first things first. You've got to understand that those families that are still grieving, and you still have the 11 that hasn't come back home, and for him to be in the country at this point in time would have, of course, not have gone very well. As a chief mourner, he still is mourning, and of course continues to pray for these families. And I must assure you that he made it very clear that he will be coming to this country, and to the viewers out there, rest assured, he is going to come to this country. He has met the families already, and he continues to meet them. And when he comes here again, it will be like a family coming together.
Let's talk about compensation now. There's been talk about compensation for the families that have suffered. How far are you down this process, and what is your expectation with this process?
Thank you very much. What the church is doing is to ensure that they assist the families in terms of basic needs, and of course, very, very important, the dependents, those who are schooling. The church is working around the clock to ensure that school fees are paid, university fees are paid. I must say that process is up and running, and some fees were paid last year. Some registration processes are going on. Some students will be put through some aptitude tests to ensure that if they have gone to a wrong field, maybe they'll have to think twice, because we want to see them succeeding. The idea and the principle is they must never be worse off than they were before.
I want to talk about accountability around the event. We've seen that at various stages, the Prophet TB Joshua has pulled out of the commission that's investigating the incident in Nigeria. Is there going to be a scenario that TB Joshua accounts in front of a commission in Nigeria, in front of the people? And I think the viewers would like to know, is there going to, at any point, being an acceptance of responsibility in a public forum by TB Joshua for what happened?
No doubt about that. Let me indicate that the Prophet has great respect for the law.
Yes.
And when the time comes that he should appear, he will appear. At this point in time, the inquest is not focusing on him. It's focusing on the witnesses, and he's not one of the witnesses. And that's why his legal team was very, very clear to say, first things first, deal with those. When you need the Prophet, he'll always be ready to go out there. He's very accountable, and he's a person who respects the law at all cost.
Finally, I want to take us back to the first question and then close the interview. You've got another batch of South African families that are going to go to Nigeria to find the kind of closure that you talked about a little bit earlier. I want to talk about those people that's come back. What has their response been to the trip, the reaction from going to the place, and how they have dealt with the loss and the grieving process?
Thank you very much. I was quite privileged to have gone out there with a group, and we flew together, and you could see these are people who are probably having conflicts in their minds. You could see some of them were not at ease, but on arrival, and of course taken through first on the 26th, we had what you call a tribute towards the Matthias families, dedicated for that process. And the following day, they had a chance to go for the teaching and, of course, further counseling, and were taken to the site. And that's where we realized that, indeed, whatever they were holding in had to come out. Some of them could not take it, of course, as the first instance. But as the explanation went on with engineers on the ground, they began to grow confidence. They went twice to the center. Some of them even went more. And they also had the chance of a one-on-one with the men of God. Surely I can't tell you what happened in the one-on-one. It was between the two. But one thing for sure, they were changed. You could see some of them saying, look, we now understand. We now feel stronger. We're now going to stand, and we now know that this was a controlled demolition rather than a structural defect.
We will have to wait and see for the official report of the Nigerian government, Mr. Nematandani, before we make that statement. However, thank you for joining us today and always being so upfront and willing to come and confront, at times, difficult questions around this building collapse that now happened 4 months ago. Thank you once again for coming.
Much appreciated.
And facing the questions for us, of course. For those of you who've just joined us, 85 South Africans died and a further 26 were injured when a building collapsed at the Synagogue Church of All Nations on September the 12th last year. Let's have a look now at some of your tweets. Donald Masiteng says, SABC Newsroom, question God and he shall deal with you. The battle is about his anointing, not the incident. Get a life, bloody agent, says Donald Masiteng. George Hatcher Senior is talking about AirAsia. The search is underway for the plane's fuselage. Family members want victims' remains to be the search priority. Nasi says CBR has also been found. So we'll know what happens soon enough. And there you have a picture related to the flight recorder being recovered. That's the flight recorder of AirAsia, of course, flight QZ8501. The black box has been recovered, and there you see it on one of our social pages, on our Twitter page. There's a lovely picture there. You can go there, of course. But let's have a look at what's happening on our Facebook page. Now, today you will see there that Cristiano Ronaldo says he wants to become one of the greatest footballers of all time after winning the FIFA Ballon d'Or for the second year running and his third one overall. Then you'll see Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has accused the West of hypocrisy for its stance over the attack on the satirical journal Charlie Hebdo, while he says it's failing to condemn anti-Muslim acts in Europe. You'll also see that the Twitter and YouTube accounts for the US military command that oversees operations in the Middle East were hacked by people claiming to be sympathetic to the Islamic State militant group being targeted in American bombing raids. There are also some photos coming from Nigeria on our page, a warning there too. Sensitive viewers, please, you will be seeing dead bodies on some of those pages. We are not allowed to really show them on air. You can find all of those and more on our Newsroom Facebook page or on sabc.co.za/news. Just a caution, some of the images there might be quite disturbing. Time now for us to take a look at your Twitter pick of the day. This one is sent in by the Ministry of Sport. Cristiano Ronaldo at the Ballon d'Or. There you have a picture of Ronaldo, that is. Are we live on air? By the Minister of Sport. So this fella was the best footballer last year. Yeah, he pretty much was. He scored 61 goals and was the outstanding player. Team won a 10th European Cup, as I know it. For those of you a little bit younger, it's the Champions League. We'll be back with you shortly. This is SABC News.
Had there been harmony between the South African government and the Nigerian government, which came through in the latter stages, the bodies would have been repatriated quicker.
Now, we always get a lot of criticism as a public broadcaster, but just how far can media go in terms of reporting the facts?
Watch Media Monitor Sundays at 9 a.m. on the SABC News channel.
This week we are taking you around the continent, telling you stories about what makes Africa, Africa.
We now head to the Kenyan coast, where we meet a man using needles to fight a growing drug culture.
A recent study revealed that there are 850 drug addicts in Diani alone, with over 220 using injectable drugs such as heroin.
In my community, I've seen a lot of these people suffer.
The Journal, every Saturday at 1:30 on SABC News.
This is Newsroom. Welcome back. If you've just joined us at SABC Newsroom, is where you can interact with us live at times on this very show. We love your interactions, especially your pictures and video. Now, for the last couple of days, scores of AfriSam mine workers at the Ulco mine in the Northern Cape have been picketing outside of that mine. They're accusing AfriSam's white supervisors from the mine at Ulco of being racist. Black workers complain that white supervisors, as well as other white workers, call them various names, amongst them baboons. Now, the National Union of Metal Workers has said since this has been happening since May of last year, and that the union will launch a complaint to the Human Rights Commission here in South Africa. Now, our very own reporter Ulrich Hendricks joins us live in Kimberley to talk to the Northern Cape's NUM Acting Regional Coordinator, Orapeleng Moraladi, about this. Very good morning to you, Ulrich. I know you've got the interview, but just set the scene for us quickly.
Hi, good morning, Evan. Like you know, the Northern Cape has always been infamous or famous for its mining activity. We've got diamonds, obviously, the big gold being a testimony of that. We've got gold, we've got platinum, and etc. that is mined over here. But for the past few days, the mining industry has been known for somewhat of a bad name, that of racism. It happened at the Alco mine, and since then there's actually been some more incidents that's come to the fore. Well, like you said earlier, with me to talk about it is NUM's Oropaleng Moralari. Ms. Moralari, let's talk about the Alco incident. What happened there? How many times has it happened?
Thank you very much, Ulrich. We had reports from our members and leadership at the branch level that since May 2014, there was an incident, the first incident that was reported, where the employees were at the processing plant. And as you know, the Alco area is situated in the veld. So there was a troop of baboons nearby, and one of the supervisors referred to, or rather said to the black workers that, go and join your brothers, your aunts, and your sisters. The matter was reported to the senior management. A report was tabled, but they were told that there's nothing that they could do, save for the supervisor should apologize.
And you feel that this is not the correct sanction? It
is not, given the fact that the company has got a policy in place, a disciplinary policy, and one recommendation in that particular policy is that should that happen, then a perpetrator or a culprit then might be dismissed.
So you're thinking that the mine is not adhering or not being firm enough in cases like this?
Yeah, as you know, historically the mining industry is one environment that is difficult to operate in as an organization. We have for the past noticed that in most cases, because of the failure by the companies to implement employment equity, you find that in most cases the executive committee that needs to run with transformational matters is constituted of 20. From 20, only 2 is black. So they've downplayed this particular thing, and it's saddening, and we're devastated as an organization. The second incident happened in November. The very same employees were referred to as baboons, and a senior a person at the mine who is a black person was referred to as a Groot Boboyano, a big baboon. And
how widespread is alleged racism within the Northern Cape mining industry?
I would say that the incident at AfriSam is but a tip of an iceberg. We'd imagine a mine like AfriSam with all vehicles in place, for example, structures of HR management, policies, and yet racism prevails and they are unable to capture or to get it done with. You would imagine now what happens at the small mines, for example, your diggings and so forth. We had reports in the past, as long as we've left as an organization, where people were told not to go and vote because they're going to vote their black father during Mandela's time. We've got incidents where people were in the evening, midnight in winter, were chased out of the mine, were beaten and so forth. So it's rife.
And then, what do you think should be done? What programs should be put in place? Is it just a transformation issue, or is it something that's much wider than that? Should we be sitting around the table, all the stakeholders, discussing this?
You see, Ulrich, the process of reconciliation should be reciprocal. And in most cases, we find that the community that were the victims of the past are the ones that are bending towards reconciliation a lot. And I think it's time that the white community begin now, to play their role in terms of addressing the question of racism. It's not only in the mines that this thing is happening. We'd imagine that the perpetrators that I'm talking about have got children at home. And if they refer to black people as baboons, it means their children are also taught that they should refer to us or black people as baboons. So it becomes a problem, societal problem, not only a problem at the mine level and so forth. So I think we'd rather have a summit where we go and discuss the issue of racism where we should put a barometer in place to check if reconciliation is helping us and what other means can be devised in terms of addressing the question of racism in the country.
Just finally, the human rights investigation, have you asked for it and how far is that?
Yes, we have encouraged our members to, because we sent them forms yesterday, so they should fill in their forms, and we want to take this up also with the police because we need to also lay a criminal case.
Thank you very much. NUM spokesperson Oropoleng Warladi speaking to us about how widespread racism is within the mining industry in Northern Cape, calling for all the parties to basically come together and that it is a societal issue that we need to deal with. Back to the studio.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. Coming to you live from the big hole there in Kimberley, that is our man, Ulrich Hendricks, talking about a very serious issue. That's racism in the mines, but it went out into racism in the wider society. Couple of hashtags that you have to follow. Hashtag racism, AfriSam, hashtag mines, and also we've got racism Cape Town hashtag that you have to follow because it's becoming a problem even in big cities like Cape Town. We were going to take some tweets, but we'll put them in tomorrow. Some of them were really got to do with us. You even asked us, where can we find us? SABC Digital News, that's where we live stream from, for some of you asking that question. Newsroom, of course, broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. The show repeats at 5 a.m. the following morning. We're also live on YouTube. We stream live. If you didn't know, the show is also there on demand the whole day. You can watch it in bits and chunks, even on my own Facebook page. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.